book of Hebrews, chapter 1. In the past, God spoke to our ancestors through the prophets at many times and in various ways. But in these last days, he has spoken to us by his Son.
So, the writer of the book of Hebrews, and I guess I'll right up front, I'll state my position. I used to think, of who the author is, I used to think there was no way that it was the Apostle Paul, because Paul always readily identifies himself, and it does seem to be a different style of writing also. But Paul talked a lot about the interaction between Jew and Gentile in the old Jewish system and the new Christian way too. So it's certainly a lot of what this book is talking about. The new and better way, the Christian way, as opposed to the old Jewish way. And how it's not that one is good and one was bad, it's that one is the fulfillment of the other. Like the Christian age is the fulfillment or reality of what the shadows of the old covenant, the Jewish ways, pointed to. But I'm not sure who the author is, and I don't think anybody is sure of who the author is. However, there is some evidence that it could be the Apostle Paul. I think mostly in the last chapter there are a few hints that it could be Paul, the Apostle Paul. But I'm not sure, so I'll just say the author. But in verse 1, the author says, in the past, God spoke in many different ways. But in these last days, he spoke to us by his Son. So I'll have to look and see when people think this book was written. But obviously it was written after the death and ascension of Jesus and before 70 AD, because that's when all the books were written of the New Testament. So all of them were written between 33 AD and 70 AD. So the author calls this the last days. In these last days, he has spoken to us by his Son. I think that's important because there is a lot of discussion about the last days, as if the last days referenced throughout the New Testament is always talking about the final days of the existence of earth as, the physical existence of earth, that it would be destroyed in sometime in our future, because it's obviously still here. But in our future, there would be the last days. But the author does not call the last days the final physical existence of the earth. He's talking about these, and he's also not talking about the last couple days. Sometimes we say, well, in the last few days I've been sick or whatever. I don't think he's talking about that. He's talking about as an overall concept of the days of man. The first century, the time between 33 AD and 70 AD was considered the last days. And that's what he's talking about. But in these last days, he has spoken to us by his Son. Because it was the last days of the old earth, the old Jerusalem, because it was about to be ushered in a new heaven and new earth, a new Jerusalem, a new age, a Christian age. It was the end of the Jewish age and the dawning of the Christian age. And I think that's what the last days there means. It's the last days of the old ways, the Jewish ways.
Whom he appointed heir of all things, and through whom also he made the universe.
All right, so in multiple references, we know that Jesus was critical in the creation of the universe and all things, and that Jesus is appointed heir of all things, that God has authority over Jesus, but God has appointed Jesus heir of all things, except for all things under God, because God still has authority over Jesus.
The Son is the radiance of God's glory, and the exact representation of his being, sustaining all things by his powerful word.
Okay, so that's a very powerful statement, saying that Son is the radiance of God's glory and the exact representation of his being. So I don't know how to explain it. I believe that God and Jesus are two separate beings, but yet at the same time they are in complete harmony and unity with each other. Jesus did not consider it robbery to be called equal with God. So it's not that he is less than God. You know, it's the same way for a husband and wife. You know, husband and wife is united as one. We're one family unit, but yet the husband has authority over the wife. And that does not make the husband better than the wife. It just says you have different responsibilities and different authority. And that helps maintain order and structure. But there's still unity and harmony.
After he had provided purification for sins, he sat down at the right hand of the Majesty in heaven.
Okay, so Jesus provided purification for sins. Now, everything leading up to the first century, especially in the Jewish world, Judeo-Christian world, was strongly tethered to the Jewish customs and the Jewish obligations, the feast days, for example, and even the prophecies, like the Daniel prophecies. They were looking for the Messiah who would bring in salvation, who would bring in the purification for sins, to make atonement for sins, to make a sacrifice for sins. That's what they were looking for. And we have lost sight of the Jewish customs and what those festivals and feast things represented, but all of them represented things in the kingdom of heaven, which we are now fully engaged in the Christian age. Jesus is now the king. We're not waiting for Jesus to be appointed king. He is king, and he has already been appointed king of all things. And he is reigning in his kingdom, and we are in his kingdom, the new heavens and new earth. And when I first started understanding this, it made me struggle a little bit to understand, well, what comes after death. But I think we continue on in this kingdom even after we die. So we have entered in to the eternal kingdom of Christ, and our physical death doesn't change that. We continue to exist in the kingdom of Christ. We would just be in a different location, but it's still the same kingdom.
So he became as much superior to the angels as the name he has inherited is superior to theirs. For to which of the angels did God...
This makes me think that someone could come to the conclusion that Jesus was promoted through the ranks, that he was an angel, but he was promoted. But yet we know that Jesus was instrumental and integral in the creation of all the universe, which may also include the angels. And when it says he became as much superior to the angels as his name was superior to theirs, I'm not sure that means he wasn't at first and then he did something to become superior. I think he was superior to start with. But I would certainly entertain some other thoughts along those lines.
God ever say, "You are my son. Today I have become your father." Or again, "I will be his father and he will be my son." And again, when God brings his firstborn into the world, he says, "Let all God's angels worship him."
All right, so again, when God brings his firstborn into the world, I struggle a little bit because I don't think Jesus is a created being. I think he's an eternal God. Now, this could be talking about when God sent Jesus down to earth in physical form as a human. Then he says, let all the angels worship him. But I don't think this is saying that Jesus was created, and then when he was created, God said, let all the angels worship him.
In speaking of the angels, he says, he makes his angels spirits and his servants flames of fire. But about the Son, he says, your throne, O God, will last forever and ever. A scepter of justice will be the scepter of your kingdom. You have loved righteousness and hated wickedness. Therefore God, your God, has set you above your companions by anointing you with the oil of joy.
All right, again, this sounds like a promotion situation, and that's not the way I typically think about it. So I certainly could be wrong, but I would love for someone to share your opinions on the nature of Jesus and whether he was created and ascended to the throne, or he was just a natural part of the Almighty Eternal God with different responsibilities, or whatever you want to call it.
He also says, in the beginning, Lord, you laid the foundations of the earth, and the heavens are the work of your hands. They will perish, but you remain. They will all wear out like a garment. You will roll them up like a robe. Like a garment they will be changed. But you remain the same, and your years will never end.
So this is more evidence to support the fact that Jesus is eternal. I think this is talking about Jesus. And that Jesus was instrumental in the creation of all the universe. So nothing was made without Jesus. Jesus was a necessary part of all creation. And that he is eternal, that he will never, what does it say? But you remain the same, and your years will never end. And Psalm 102:25 is a reference there.
To which of the angels did God ever say, sit at my right hand until I make your enemies a footstool for your feet? Are not all angels ministering spirits sent to serve those who will inherit salvation?
All right, so this gives us a clue as to what angels' purpose is. All angels are ministering spirits. They serve those who will inherit salvation. So in a way, you could look at angels as personal servants of humans, that they minister to humans who are in the Lamb's Book of Life. So, like guardian angels, that's kind of what the way Hollywood, I guess, portrays it, and I think it's fairly accurate, at least according to this, that the saved humans have guardian angels, people who minister to your needs and help you throughout life. So this chapter talks a lot about who Jesus is. However, I'm still confused, at least about whether or not he was created in the same as an angel and then promoted as more than the angels, or if he was more than the angels to start with. But this is a good place to study when you want to study about the nature of Jesus. So I hope someone will contribute their thoughts along these lines as well. That's Hebrews chapter 1. We'll go through a chapter by chapter study of the book of Hebrews.